Inside a locked room at Neverland Ranch, Michael Jackson kept a secret that only one person on Earth ever fully understood. Not his mother, not his closest friends, not the millions of fans who worshipped him. Only Lisa Marie Presley knew the real weight he carried behind the sequins and the spotlight. And by the time she finally understood it, it was already too late to change what came next. This is the story of what happened behind closed doors, the secret confessions, the quiet warnings, and the tragic ending that both of them somehow always knew was coming. Long before the world knew their names together, Michael Jackson and Lisa Marie Presley were both children living inside a version of fame that almost nobody else could relate to. Michael was performing in front of thousands of people before he was even 10 years old, memorizing choreography and vocal runs while other kids were still learning to ride bicycles. Lisa Marie was growing up on the grounds of Graceland, watched by security guards, surrounded by fans who camped outside the gates, just hoping for a glimpse of her father. Their childhoods were extraordinary, but they were also strange and isolating, in ways that only a handful of people in the entire world could ever understand. When they crossed paths backstage at one of Elvis's concerts, it wasn't a meeting that either of them thought much about at the time. It was just two children in a chaotic world of adults. Two kids who happened to share a strange kind of loneliness neither of them could name yet. She was only 9 years old. She watched her father, the most famous entertainer in the world, slowly disappear behind prescription bottles and closed bedroom doors in the years before his death. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes. She saw the way fame had slowly hollowed him out from the inside, even as the world outside kept demanding more from him. When he died, Lisa Marie didn't just lose her father. She lost her understanding of what safety even meant. She grew up believing that the people she loved most were somehow always standing on the edge of disappearing. She tried to outrun that fear. She married young, she had children, and she tried to build a life far away from the industry that had taken her father. But something kept pulling her back toward the world she had tried so hard to leave behind. And in the early 1990s, that pull had a name: Michael Jackson. By the time they reconnected, Michael was no longer the boy from the Jackson 5. He was the most famous entertainer alive, a man whose face had graced magazine covers on every continent, whose music had reshaped an entire industry. But behind the fame, Michael was unraveling. He was facing devastating allegations that threatened to destroy his career and his reputation. He was undergoing surgery after surgery, changing his appearance in ways that worried the people closest to him. He had grown increasingly isolated inside the walls of Neverland, surrounded by people who told him what he wanted to hear instead of what he needed to hear. When Michael and Lisa Marie began speaking again, something shifted almost immediately. Friends who knew them both later said it felt less like a new romance and more like two old souls recognizing each other across a crowded room. Michael would call her late at night just to talk. He would ask her questions about her father that nobody else had ever dared to ask. Questions about the loneliness of fame, about what it felt like to lose someone the whole world claimed to love. Lisa Marie, for the first time in years, felt like she was talking to someone who didn't need anything explained to him. He simply understood. Their romance moved at a pace that stunned everyone who knew them. Within months, Michael was telling Lisa Marie that he loved her, that he wanted to marry her, that he wanted to build the kind of family life he had never truly experienced himself. For a man who had spent his entire life performing for an audience, his declarations to Lisa Marie were said to be startlingly direct, almost desperate in their honesty. He wasn't managing his image with her. He wasn't calculating his next move. He was, by every account, simply telling her the truth about how he felt. 20 days after her divorce was finalized, Lisa Marie married Michael Jackson in a private ceremony far from the cameras that followed them everywhere else. When the news broke weeks later, the reaction was immediate and explosive. Reporters called it a publicity stunt. Critics said Michael was using the marriage to distract the public from his legal troubles. Even Lisa Marie's own mother reportedly expressed serious doubts about the relationship, worried that her daughter was being pulled into something she couldn't fully see the danger of yet. But inside the walls of Neverland, away from the noise, something quieter and more complicated was unfolding. Lisa Marie began to see sides of Michael that the public never got to witness. She saw a man who could be playful and childlike one moment, riding rides on his private amusement park, laughing without a trace of the pressure that followed him everywhere else. And then she saw a man who could disappear into himself entirely, sitting in silence for hours, consumed by fears he could barely put into words. It was during one of those quiet moments, sitting together by a fireplace, that Michael told her something that would stay with her for the rest of her life. He looked at her and said he was afraid he was going to end up exactly like her father, not metaphorically, not as some passing worry. He meant it literally, and he meant it with a kind of certainty that unsettled her far more than the fear itself did. Lisa Marie tried everything she could to reassure him. She told him he had people who loved him, people who would help him if he ever needed it. Michael just nodded, almost as if he already knew that reassurance wouldn't be enough to change what was coming. As their marriage continued, Lisa Marie began piecing together the reality that Michael had spent years hiding from public view. He was relying on prescription medications to sleep, to manage pain, to get through performances that exhausted him more than the world ever realized. He was surrounded by doctors and handlers who gave him whatever he asked for, rarely questioning the long-term cost. Lisa Marie tried to intervene. She tried to get him help, tried to convince him to slow down, tried to be the stabilizing presence he seemed to be searching for. But she had already lived through this exact story once before, and some part of her recognized, long before she wanted to admit it, that she couldn't control how it would end. Their marriage lasted less than 2 years. When they divorced in 1996, it wasn't out of a lack of love. By most accounts, it was because Lisa Marie finally understood that loving someone isn't always enough to save them, especially when they are surrounded by a machine that profits from keeping them exactly as broken as they already are. She had to choose between losing herself completely or walking away, and she chose to walk away. But walking away didn't mean she stopped caring. In the years that followed, Michael and Lisa Marie stayed in occasional contact. Two people who had once shared something the rest of the world could never fully understand, now living separate lives, but never quite letting go of what they had built together. Michael continued his career, continued performing, continued trying to reinvent himself in front of an audience that both adored him and picked apart every choice he made. But those closest to him say the warning signs never stopped. They only became easier to hide. On June 25th, 2009, the fear that Michael had confessed to Lisa Marie all those years earlier by the fireplace became reality. He died at his home in Los Angeles, and an autopsy later confirmed that a combination of powerful sedatives had stopped his heart. He was 50 years old, exactly the kind of ending he had once predicted for himself with a certainty that had haunted Lisa Marie for over a decade. She has said in the years since that she spent that entire day overwhelmed by grief she couldn't explain, long before she even knew he was gone. When the news finally reached her, it confirmed something she had feared for years without ever fully admitting it to herself. The prophecy Michael spoke of that night at Neverland had come true, in almost exactly the way he described it. In the years that followed, Lisa Marie rarely spoke publicly about their marriage. When she finally did open up, she described a relationship that was far more genuine than the public ever gave it credit for. A bond built not on fame or convenience, but on a shared understanding of what it meant to grow up inside a spotlight that never turned off. She admitted that she had loved him deeply, and that losing him reopened a wound she had carried since she was a child, watching her own father slip away in the same devastating pattern. Lisa Marie Presley passed away in 2023, and the memoir she left behind revealed even more about the man she had once tried so hard to save. It painted a portrait of two people who found something rare in each other, a connection built on mutual understanding rather than image or attention. It also confirmed what many had long suspected, that Michael's fear that night by the fireplace wasn't just a passing comment. It was a warning he had given the one person he trusted enough to hear it. What makes their story so difficult to forget isn't just the tragedy of how it ended. It's the quiet honesty buried inside it. The idea that two of the most photographed, most scrutinized people on the planet still felt completely unseen by everyone except each other. Fame gave them everything the outside world could offer, and somehow it still left both of them searching for the one thing money and success could never provide. Someone who understood exactly what it cost to live the life they were born into. Lisa Marie carried that understanding with her long after their divorce, long after Michael's death, and even in the final years of her own life. Those who knew her best said she never fully stopped thinking about that night by the fireplace, the moment Michael looked at her with a kind of certainty that felt more like acceptance than fear. She had tried to argue him out of it. She had tried to remind him of everything he still had to live for. But some part of her, the part that had already lost one larger-than-life figure to the exact same slow unraveling, understood that some warnings aren't meant to be corrected. They're meant to be witnessed. In the end, their story wasn't really about fame or scandal or the headlines that followed them for decades. It was about two people who recognized something painfully familiar in each other, who tried to build something real inside a world that made real connection almost impossible, and who ultimately couldn't outrun the patterns that had shaped them both since childhood. It's a story that continues to resonate because it reminds us that even the most famous people in the world are still just people, carrying fears they can barely speak out loud, hoping that someone, somewhere, will finally understand.